Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Inner Eye podcast. My name is Jake Coburn. Some people call me Andrik, but that's a long story. I've been really inspired lately. This is something I've had an idea to do for a long time, actually. I've been binge listening to podcasts as of late, with podcasters like Duncan Trussell, Joe Rogan, Dr. Christopher Ryan, Sam Harris, Zach Leary, Aubrey Marcus, Emil Amos, and a whole host of other really interesting people that make me feel like I am hanging out with the coolest people in the world all day long, every day, while I'm working in the privacy of my own home, which is phenomenal. And I really just wanted to do this project as an exploration, to try a new medium, to get vulnerable, to try something new, and mostly to learn something. I've picked a bunch of people who I know, who I've had interesting conversations with in the past, people that I could look up to and perhaps call a teacher. And I just am using this as an excuse to be able to talk to these people who I would love to talk to anyway. But for some reason, when you tell people that you're going to record it and post it on the internet, they're a lot more eager to have a sustained conversation with you than just casual chit-chat. I'm interested in exploring topics that relate to art. Naturally, most of the people I know being artists, most of the guests that I've invited to participate on this show so far are artists, but they're all artists that have a really interesting perspective on life and experience of something that I think you could all say. I think you could say that all of the guests that I've invited are on a bit of a spiritual quest, and they all have fascinating perspective on how to navigate the life predicament that we're in, being thrust into this world and having to surf the ebbs and flows of the reality in which we all live. So I'm really interested in speaking on subjects that fascinate me, talking about things like mysticism and esoteric knowledge, wisdom traditions like Buddhism, meditation, psychedelics and psychedelic states. And recently I got the HTC Vive, the most advanced consumer version of virtual reality that exists in this present time, which is a remarkable and futuristic invention that I'm really excited to explore the potentials of, and I've been really inspired to incorporate it into my art and to create content for it. So hopefully some people may be able to shed some light on that as well. My first guest on the show today is Akira Beard. I met Akira when I was studying at the Academy of Art University, and he was a teacher there. He's a remarkable dude. He's incredibly humble, and I feel tremendous warmth and peace in his presence. He is an incredibly talented artist who is not only talented and skillful in technical means, but also imbues his work with an incredible amount of intention and meaning. And he's also, like I said, he's somebody that's actively trying to navigate life in a wise way. And he's a very curious person who is constantly learning through his experiences and then implanting his discoveries and lessons into the artwork that he creates. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you listen to further podcasts. I'm Jake Cobran. This is Akira Beard with the Inner Eye podcast. So, welcome, Akira, to the podcast. This is the first Inner Eye podcast that I'm doing, and really honored to have you as a guest. So, welcome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and if you guys don't know, Akira is a really remarkable artist who I've always been attracted to based on the sort of dharmic quality to his work. Akira definitely is someone who has taken his technical prowess and applied it to his art form in a way that has a lot of purpose, and I think that communicates a message that really is able to reach people and have a positive impact on their lives. So really cool, thanks, man. Thanks for what you do. So yeah, like, why don't you start out by just telling me a bit about your work? Like, what have you been up to lately? Because I follow your stuff on Instagram and whatever. It seems like you've been doing these like figure mash drawings lately, and I saw you were doing like, was it like a photo montage series for a while in New York or something? So yeah, just like give me the rundown on some stuff you've been working on lately with your art.
Basically, my art, it's always a constant evolution. It's almost like writing a book, and like one chapter evolves into the next, and the content I'm always exploring in that evolution is life itself. And that's why I'm always, like, for example, I'm here in Mexico. I'm not even sure why. It's like it's always in hindsight, like I kind of realize why I'm even here. So, like when you ask me why am I in Mexico, I'm not even sure because I'm here right now. And so, like, with my artwork, like what I'm doing right now, it's, it's evolved into an exploration of the subconscious. And so with this current series I call Life Drawings, it's a play on word, with the tradition of life drawing, which is, as you know, but maybe some people don't, it's, life drawing is working from a live model, like whether it's clothed or nude, like under a spotlight, like working to kind of solve, like, issues of design or whatever with the human figure. But I'm saying, like, like my play on those words is life drawing. It's the subject itself is life. And so these drawings that you're seeing with the mesh figures, it's really, kind of a form of automatic drawing where I just lay down a bunch of lines, for example. I don't know what's going to happen from it. And, just kind of let the subconscious just do what it wants. And then consciously I come in and kind of connect everything. And you see the result of the successful ones, but that's 1 out of every 10, if that. So it's very inconsistent, but that's kind of, I guess in the short version would be what I'm working on is the subconscious and exploring and expressing that through art.
Cool, man. Yeah, it's this sort of redundant thing. Like, we kind of know what naked people look like by now. Like, I definitely appreciate there's something phenomenally inspiring about seeing a really masterfully crafted life drawing. Like, when there's some people like at the Grand Central Atelier or some of these classical realist art schools that just have such an incredible ability to see what's in front of them and apply their knowledge of anatomy and create something really lifelike. Sure. But it's been, and there's a tradition to that, so people are honoring that tradition it's almost like a religious school of art in a way.
Sure.
Uh, but I think that we're at a point where, because there's new technology that allows us to capture that so effortlessly already, such as photography, that we have an urgence now to create something that really speaks to our times and is new. And I think people are really starting to look inward now in a different way and fuse the kind of inward glance with the outward seeing of the world. And yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that in your work, and
Yeah,
it's really cool.
well, thank you. That's a great point because from the beginning, that was I mean, I didn't know that from the start when I went to art school, but that's what it became like pretty quickly is that I only was interested to learn, figure drawing and learning the language of painting as well as a means to the end of exploring and going inward, as you're saying. Um, there's a thing with craftsmanship and even aesthetics that's a form of art. But for myself, I mean, it's just due to kind of my own destiny, if you want to say that, like looking inward and recognizing where I come from, my own upbringing, and compensating for that. It was just really, to learn how to draw the human figure, for example, and how I'm applying it now. It was always with the purpose of not the craft itself, but expressing these abstract inward things of emotions and thoughts and life experiences.
So was that a natural evolution, or did something catalyze that, where you were doing this more outward form, weighted art, and then at a certain point you decided to kind of move more towards the inner perspective, or uh, like what inspired you to go that way? Like what was that transition about for you?
It was both natural and unnatural. It was when I was in art school, it was unnatural in the sense that I made a very conscious decision not to do anything conceptual, not to work with content, just to show up at school every day and work with the concepts of how to draw and how to paint that the teachers would teach. I say that's unnatural because I really kind of divided myself, and at the time, I really felt like I was on the edge of a breakdown ultimately because I felt like a machine. But it was natural in the sense that I was fortunate to meet really great professors, that they went beyond how to draw, and they really went, deep into the question of what to draw. So I put those two together. By the time I graduated, my last semester, in particular, I made that shift. Like, let's take what I've learned so far and how to paint and how to draw, and let's apply it to what's important to me, in terms of what to draw. And that was, like I said, it's more than I graduated in 2004, so that's when I really started. I would say that's the place that I really started to actually make art in regards to what we're describing. So I still follow that structure. It's never enough for me to paint a still life, like to try to solve issues of painting or drawing. Like, how do you arrange a composition? That always comes secondary to the content, to what I am painting or drawing.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I think that's something that's really lacking in a lot of art students and just, artists throughout the world in general. Like being familiar with the atelier system and the kind of fine art world. I was really struck by the lack of personal, like the lack of anything personal found in the work of the artists that were at these schools. And I went to the Angel Academy of Art in Florence and did a semester there, and there were probably 5 students in the whole school out of maybe the whole student body of 60 people that actually created work from a place of expressing something that came from their personal imagination and reflected actually their view onto life. And very few people in the school even created artwork outside of the school itself, and were just so invested in learning the technique and putting so much weight and value onto whether or not something was correct and having it validated by the teachers. It was really strange, like, because I agree with you. For me, the act of creating art it's always been a sort of cathartic experience, or something. It's always been really related with just my ever shifting perspective of my life, and it helps me sort of gain clarity. And I also feel like it's a vehicle to communicate something that I perceive as valuable, that hopefully other people, when they see the work, can gain value from, also through my experience that I'm communicating through the painting. And that's just, I think that, at the Academy of Art, which we're both pretty familiar with, I think that's something I found to be generally lacking, as well as there's not a lot of emphasis on that. There's not a lot of emphasis in putting the personal into what you create. And it's kind of a tragedy in a way.
Yeah, like, I can speak on issues of this, with a certain level of clarity, because I had to define for myself, as a result of my own insecurities, not only in school, as you mentioned, but even post-school, like, on the exhibition circuit, feeling alienated in that sense, like, ironically, in the artist community. And I still, I don't struggle with it now. Like, I'm actually content to a very certain degree with working out, these issues of, with defining, like, what we're talking about. And it always kind of, for example, struck me just odd, like, not in any type of righteous or, objective sense of, like, the art should be anything, but just kind of in a fundamental sense of just, human experience or existence, how I would talk to another artist, or whether it's friend, peer, or whatever, and it's pretty consistent how, like, a person would be very passionate on some aspect of life, whether it was political or social or existential, but then, when they go to the canvas or this artist studio, is so removed or divided from what they actually create as an artist, And for myself, that's what, I don't think I think we started the podcast after this, but that's what I was saying with me being here in, Tulum, Mexico. It's an opportunity just to relax, because for me, it's just been this, I didn't even realize how much it integrated, but art and life just really integrated into something very harmonious and, unified. So there's no separation.
It's like, it's a little bit of a blessing and a curse in a way. Like, I think people look at the artist lifestyle as, like, being completely free, because you can create your own schedule and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's like all time is work time, and I think, like, artists live in that world constantly, usually. Like, it's hard to take a break, versus if you have some other kind of job where you go to a place and you're on a schedule, and then you, like, go home, and there's that, like, clear boundary between, like, what's, like, work and what's the rest of your life, and you can go home and relax. But, like, yeah, like, being an artist, unless you work for a company, like, you can definitely have, like, an art job, but as a fine artist, there often isn't that clear distinction between, like, what is lifetime and what is work time. They're usually, like, really enmeshed.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's my scenario, and that's what I was saying with, the individual that divides the two, it becomes a thing where, and I understand that process, and it becomes kind of externalized, and that, to me, it's kind of ironic in the sense that, and I think social media kind of feeds, and even, it definitely magnifies it, how Not that an artist has to be introverted, but there's definitely it kind of magnifies, the extroverted aspect of, the artist, where it becomes about, like when I was, one of my first experiences with a gallery, for example, was they sat me down and they explained this process of a game, and this is how it works, where, we're going to help, we're going to help achieve the goal, hopefully, of building a name, a brand for you. And the thing is, you want consistency. Like, you don't want to confuse the audience. You want to kind of, find your niche, which means finding your subject in the manner in which you paint it, and just basically repeat that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by kind of a divide. And for myself, it had nothing to do with what I'm interested in, and that's what I'm saying. It has to do with the content of subject matter of my passion, which is like existence and life, and it's always evolving, it's always changing, just like my thoughts, my feelings from day to day. So why wouldn't my painting reflect that too? Why would I paint the same thing over and over and over again? You know what I mean?
Yeah. The whole social media thing is a little weird. Like, I don't know if you feel this way, but I get to this place sometimes where if I haven't put something out on like Instagram for like a day or two, there's like a little anxiety spike. That's like, shit, man, I gotta make some new work. I gotta put it on like Facebook or Instagram. Like, I feel like if I'm not constantly posting new work on social media, that like somehow I'm like no longer an artist, or like people will, I'll become non-existent in the eyes of the audience that I once had, or something like that. It's like this funny like new anxiety that I think like back in the old days, like a few hundred years ago, artists would work for months or years on a piece before presenting it to an audience. And now just social media creates this urgency of just like such a fast rate of production. Like, you have to keep putting out work, Yeah, like, do you get that? Like, how do you, like, what's your relationship with social media as an artist?
My relationship with it, I guess, I could try to empathize with what you're saying, and I can understand it to a certain extent, but it was just like, just like my relationship with gallery, or, like artist peers and whatever. I just really come from a place of kind of a certain integrity of autonomy. It's just like, and it's not even a discipline really. It's just I focus on what's important for myself, in terms of what I create, and I'm not really like influenced by things like social media, or the opinions of others or whatever. The only thing that's ever really kind of interfered or kind of compromised that is intimate relationships. But
Yeah.
that's another subject. But social media, I find it really interesting. It's just like that. I mean, my lack of interest is in how it magnifies, like, again, a more externalized relationship with, in regards to what we're talking about with art, where there is, pressure to, just like, before it was more with galleries. Now the individual has more access to build a brand on their own. And I think that just kind of magnifies, in my opinion, a certain kind of desperation towards that, whether it's conscious or unconscious, with, all these kind of tactics of getting more followers and stuff like that. I'm not interested in that, like, personally. I have my own agenda, and I use all these mediums as a resource to try to, expand on that agenda. And that agenda is very internal.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm working to get there. I'm still definitely pretty influenced by like the social media thing, I guess. But it's interesting. Like, I just got back from a 10-day silent Vipassana meditation retreat.
Yeah.
Have you done that with the Dhamma Center, the Dhamma organization?
No, but I know all about it, and it's come up more than once. But it's definitely one of those things. who knows? Like maybe it could be, I've had friends that have done it, and it's very inspirational. But definitely, it takes a commitment, right? And I'm kind of doing that in my own way here, but obviously it's far from that. The actual process and the discipline of what you commit and put yourself through, like for the 10-day Vipassana. But I've never done it.
Yeah. Well, you're like a fully realized being, so you probably you don't need that.
Definitely.
unlike me, I'm just marinating in mental filth. So
no. Everyone else, I got definitely my baggage and neurosis.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Could always be working.
Of course.
On it. Yeah.
But yeah, so what I was saying is like, so 10 days without anything outside of myself, like no social media, no even like the kind of validation or whatever external stimulus that we get just from like the people around us, like in our environment, whether it's on social media or not, like none of that. And you become really still in the place of not needing that. And I was really nervous when I got out of the retreat. Like I think it was like I waited pretty much a full day, like almost 24 hours before re-entering the social media realm, because I knew that the minute that I would do that, I would just get hooked into it. Like it's really interesting, like after 10 days of no technology and being really deliberate, because another thing that occurs in that 10 days is that you really get into this place of doing one thing at a time. Like when you're eating a meal after 7 days in silence and doing nothing and having no stimulation, you're really present with eating that meal. Like you're only doing that. And what I noticed immediately upon reintegrating with the rest of the world outside of that little bubble that I was in is that we're constantly like doing things, multiple things at once, So social media kind of amplifies that, because you have like the feed and there's a million conversations happening at once. You're often chatting with like 3 or 4 people at once, and you have all different tabs open and you're like on different things. So it was just a big shock, and it was a difficult reintegration to enter into that pace that I think society kind of pushes at us. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I mean, for myself, what's interesting about that is, the last sentence that you said about reintegration. Like for you, coming from Vipassana and reintegrating back into, the everyday world of, its pace and its demands and whatever. And myself, I'm kind of an extreme person, or I recognize that about who I am at this point, and I'm kind of on the other spectrum of I'm focusing on my own reintegration. I could tell you stories, like it's basically over the past few years, but I have almost nothing, and the stuff that I did have in terms of sentimental value, it burned down in my friend's house. Like a little more than a year ago, I believe. So I basically have like a laptop. I have my, my mala, my necklace, and those are the only 2 things that, give me anxiety, like if I don't have. And the only reason the laptop does, because it contains my, my life work of, my art practice, which I'm trying to turn into, ultimately books. And so
put it on the cloud, man.
Exactly. That's the artist. That's the artist's brain. That like, how come I haven't done that? Like, because I'm just like I'm too, involved in just kind of like being, like walking the streets and being airheaded and absorbing everything. So if anything, it's like that's me being in Mexico. It's like hopefully this is my, transition when I'm coming back to the States in like maybe 2 weeks or something. To reintegrate, to begin to do that, to do what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone so far off that I lost track of that. Like, yeah, just to sit down and watch a movie and just to even solitude. I've been in a certain type of solitude for a while now. Like, no real, definitely no intimate relationships. Like, no,
Hmm.
even my friends. It's just like a friend here and there, and not even spending much time with them. So, anyways, yeah, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but yeah, reintegration, and so.
It's just so trippy, man. Like I was living in Bali for 5 months, which is, oh my god, it's an amazing place, but it has a completely different character to the environment and sort of essence to it. And it's really old in a way. Like you're surrounded by all these ancient temples that are everywhere among the island,
Yeah.
and also their culture is really ancient, and it has a real they put a lot of emphasis on their spirituality and their practice. And I think the community that's there of sort of Western refugees, expats, like are people that found something inherently wrong with the way that the Western world works, and they move there because in seeking a different way of life to find something more sort of spiritually fulfilling. And I remember, so I flew from Bali, and the first place I went to was Portugal after Bali. And even though there's still an older aspect to Portugal, it's still a difference in culture from the United States, but it's still much more Western than Bali is. It was a big shock, and like coming from Bali into more modern places. Like I went to Barcelona. It's a big shock. Like there's the major cities with big trains, and everyone's like busy on their cell phones, and like it's like everyone's racing around. And when you're in that place of having just come from this really open, spacious environment, you're like, where are they going? Like, what is everyone racing around to do? It's like everyone seems like so kind of anxious and preoccupied, and in this like hustle and bustle that I felt very free from when I was in Bali. And it's really interesting, like you're saying, going from Mexico and having to reintegrate into the modern world. It's kind of fascinating just how much the environment that you're in and the culture of that environment impacts your inner world and your kind of psychological framework.
Yeah, I agree, and I think of someone like I mean, it's great that you had like these experiences and these reference points that you could bounce off of between kind of like obviously like modern America and yeah the pace of it and everything, and then to go to somewhere like Bali, and I'm sure you've gone to like other places where it's more spacious and like it's a whole different relationship with culturally with existence. And it makes me think of someone like, from an artist standpoint, someone like Thoreau, who's like at one point a huge influence on me in his whole, project with
Yeah.
Walden, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how like he, he was living in his own kind of modern America, and he was really, with the awareness and expressive of, a critical way of like how people were living, like how people just kind of basically, that's just like today, we're living under this pressure just to make a living, and so much of their day was going to, working at jobs they didn't really want to go to, and, just to make money or whatever. And then he goes into the woods and he finds, certain, equanimity, and he has his own realization. But then from an artist's point, the solution, like for him, wasn't to like stay there, even though he found his own enlightenment out there, right? But to come back to the modern world, just like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, like goes into this other world, gets
Yeah,
riches.
that's like a bodhisattva sort of thing, or like the Buddha, like he had his enlightenment, but then went out and decided to go back into society and spread what he had learned.
Exactly, and so I bring all this up, just in response to what you're saying, because I relate to it too. It's just like that's what I mean by the subject, the content, and like his life itself, and that's the that's the integration, like between, like for us as artists, art and life. Not that, again, it's subjective. It doesn't have to be that, but it's like for someone like myself, it's like that's the purpose of, and the motivation and the muse to create art is just like Thoreau or the hero's journey or the Bodhisattva, to take these experiences of realization, of deeper awareness, and to express them in creative ways so that it could inspire others in different forms, whether it's just inspiration, towards, like, it could be just the aesthetics, more the surface, or it could be actual, deeper meaning within the actual artwork. But somehow you can translate or transfer, these experiences you have into something more beneficial to, your community. So
Yeah,
that's what I'm
that's so
doing.
cool, man.
So it's
That's
not, that it just brings that all back around. So that's my, the fundamental, like, kind of post I work from. It's like, that's why stuff like social media or the gallery thing, or like friends or peers in that sense, just have never. I've just, it's not even a disciplinary thing. I don't know why. I've just been really driven by that alone, and I continue to be. It gives me a reason to wake up every single day, to go into the world, with a certain type of venture. And it's not even, I don't even think of like making artwork as discipline at all, because it really serves that purpose, and it's very fulfilling.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I think, I really see that in your work, and that's one of the things that really inspires me about it. And yeah, I mean, that was something. I think Alex Gray is really the artist that solidified that idea for me. Like, when I was studying at the academy and I was studying illustration, and up to a certain point, a lot of my main inspiration, as other artists, people I looked up to as kind of role models, were people that were working for like commercial industries. They were making like magic cards or concept art for video games, and they're very skilled and very successful in a kind of worldly sense. But I was becoming like increasingly more depressed around that, like kind of entering into this existential void around my work. And then I read The Mission of Art by Alex Gray, and he was talking about that exactly, how art has this power to be able to reach people and to truly influence people in a positive way, and to make a real difference and change in the world, and to be used as something that's serving others and isn't just something that you're doing for some kind of technical purpose or ego purpose or for a material purpose, but can really serve a higher purpose for helping people. And that definitely just turned the whole thing upside down for me, and gave me so much more inspiration and meaning and motivation to create, so that I could at least attempt to do some good with what I'm given in the world, and with my choice to be an artist. And I just read, I'm not sure, have you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning?
Yeah, that's one of my cornerstones. It's like
Yeah,
I can't
wow,
recall
what an inspiring book.
yeah, I don't know how many times I've read it, and I still go back to it. I mean, that's why I
That
use, phrasing like purpose and meaning so much.
Yeah, yeah, that like what you just described really reminds me of everything that he was talking about, which is, where there's a why, there's a way, basically. That, like, no matter what circumstance you're placed into, if you can discern purpose within that, a purpose to do good for others, then you can get through it. So Viktor Frankl was in the internment camps, as he was a Jewish psychiatrist in Austria during the Nazi occupation, and was put into Auschwitz. And he was able to get through that and survive through his ability to see how other people were in need and how he could rise up and help them. And he found afterwards that really influenced his work as a psychiatrist. And I know you know this, Akira, because you've read it a bunch of times, but I'm kind of reiterating for anyone that would be listening. And, um, you know, in dealing with people, he found so many people were miserable because they were in this place of the existential void. Like they weren't connecting their lives to serving a higher purpose. And he found that happiness or something, not even happiness necessarily, but something deeper than happiness, like um fulfillment was really heavily weighted upon how much we use our energy to help other people rather than do things that serve our own material needs and ego desires. And yeah, man, I think that's a call for not just artists, but for all people, but definitely artists too. The more people can kind of integrate that into what they do as an artist, the better.
Yeah, and like even beyond art, and like that's one aspect, of like culture and human experience. I mean, for some, but it's just the thing with Viktor Frankl. It's just how he really acknowledged that aspect of using phrases like the existential vacuum, which is like this sense of a void that even if the person doesn't really have the conscious phrasing of it, like just the basic question of like, why am I here?
Yeah.
Going through life without like knowing, and just being so vulnerable to especially in a culture like ours, with commercialism and the politics and like both together and everything, and just kind of that power monger of influences where you're so much more vulnerable if you don't really have a foundation within yourself, like that integrity of a reason why you wake up, a personal existential reason, like why you are here. And that was like, the formula that he created about despair. Despair, it was something like purpose. A life lived without purpose lacks meaning, and that leads to, despair. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I mean about waking up every day with a sense of purpose that gives your life content, meaning, and with as for me as an artist, that just like the art just reflects that. And that's the thing. That's the what I put the most value on. It's always great to sell a piece of artwork, and it's flattering when someone can appreciate it for whatever reasons. But it's just to have something really autonomous to yourself, that's not based on these external things. I hold that as very sacred, and people such as Viktor Frankl have been my teachers and guides. In that sense, my own awareness of what any of that even means.
Totally. Let's talk about the void, man. So, like for me, definitely my favorite series of work that you've done are your portraits and you include writings, mostly of spiritual teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh or Chogyam Trungpa, and I've been really I've come to sort of some new perspectives through the meditation retreat, and then since leaving the meditation retreat, I've also been doing a lot of meditating on my own and also exploring Dharmic teachings more deeply. I've been reading The Individual's Path of Liberation by Chogyam Trungpa, which is a really amazing book. But there's some things within Buddhist ideology that kind of seems paradoxical to me. And so what you're talking about with having meaning and intention and all that, like absolutely on a fundamental level, I agree with that. Like in my own experience with life, if you're kind to people and generous, then you feel it's like a higher vibration than if you're not. But at the same time, the fundamental aspect of Buddhism being the realization that everything is impermanent, that no matter what you do in this lifetime, there will be a point where even the last, most distant echoes of your last action will be forgotten. And you can even look at all of human society that way and see that at some point, human beings are impermanent. There will be no trace eventually of human beings. There will be probably no trace at a certain point of any of this universe whatsoever, if you really consider all things as impermanent. So it's this kind of paradox where in Buddhism there is a real emphasis put on serving others and fulfilling virtuous qualities and being kind and compassionate and generous and selfless and non-harming to other people and all that. But then there's also the aspect of all phenomena that anyone could ever experience in this reality as being illusory and impermanent and empty. So in that way, why does it seems like a paradox to me, because if everything is impermanent and empty and illusory, why then does it really matter what we do? Because anything that we do as it's experienced by other people would be an illusion to both of us. It would be fundamentally not real, you know? So anyway, that's something that I've been tripping about, and I was wondering if you had a perspective on that.
My response to that would be, there's, I think there's a really fine line with, something like Buddhism, and I think it's something it easily, like, a lot of religious and spiritual things, it gets kind of put into different contexts, and because of that, like, it just becomes a person's kind of, it validates or it fulfills like their own kind of mental projections onto the world, and it's just something like concepts like impermanence, and like for myself, I mean it's really aided me in how I relate to the world and how I live, which is to be more kind of to have a broader view, and I think there's a place where it's just, it can be something like Buddhism, for example, it can be very dogmatic, where if you just kind of accept it like everything as is, and, like for myself, I've just taken, I don't consider myself a Buddhist, I don't consider myself a Christian, but I study both, and I apply aspects of both, and, the aspects I take and apply is, like how to live, and, something like compassion, for example, it's, I think, I can be completely wrong. I'll just take a stab at this. And this is just my own kind of, experience. I could only imagine if I was raised on, or if I just sought out something like Buddhism and I took on, the effort to be a more compassionate person, how it would be, superficial in a sense. Like, I don't know if I'm compassionate or not. Like sometimes people say I am, and how I even came to a place where anyone would begin to even say that is kind of from my own experiences of confronting myself, my pitfalls, my fallacies, just my ego-based stuff, and from that empathy would come where I would, begin to see how a person outside of myself, I would see myself within them. I'm like, wow, like this person's really a jerk. But like I could remember when I was exactly like them. You know what I mean? And so from that, a natural thing of compassion is born, to accept them just as you've accepted yourself. And I think that's a much different path than reading it in a book or going to, like I've gone to like, Dharma circles, and like I remember going to the Zen center like when I was in Detroit a few times, and how it easily becomes, and Chogyam Trungpa's like I love him because he cuts through all this. He calls it spiritual materialism, where
Totally, yeah.
it's really, these things such as the Buddha and, like the Dharma, all this stuff. Spiritual materialism becomes, this thing where it's about benefiting the ego, which contradicts like the actual teachings of the Buddha, where you're proud of yourself, or, you know what I mean? It's like kind of it's effort to be compassionate or whatever, as opposed to it actually being sincere and kind of natural and effortless,
Yeah, definitely. It's like people still I think that the true teachings of meditation, if you start to practice and really look into that, are to see everything as just being ephemeral and kind of like transient, and that there's still something though. Like I can't really call it me, but there is a consciousness that I can recognize as existing, I think, that perceives phenomena that are arising and passing. And I think that's the kind of shift that people like Chogyam Trungpa attempt to get their students to realize, which is people enter into this place still on the basis of the reality of the self as that being something as stable and permanent, and then ego identifications like I am now compassionate, I am now virtuous, etc., rather than the real practice being in releasing identification with the mental construction of the self, and then also releasing the identification with any of the phenomena that arise and then dissolve. And then it seems to me that as one becomes more identified with that thing which is just perceiving the phenomena and not the phenomena themselves, that there is naturally more of a spaciousness that opens, and naturally more qualities that you could call compassion and things like this that just kind of seem to happen with that person.
Yeah, it's so much of this. It makes me think of someone like Chuang Tzu. It's like like one of his famous sayings about once you grasp the meaning, you let go of the words, and it's just like I feel like something like Buddhism. So much of it is about that, and again, it kind of points to how to live, which is kind of working with what you have on the spot in the moment and engaging with that, and that takes the form of a certain naturalness of being spontaneous and creative. Again, coming back to art, and it's again, someone like Chogyam Trungpa, when the first question he posed about any of this with Buddhism and these concepts, I think it really comes back to that idea of reintegrating or integrating this into your everyday life. Because conceptually, sure, some of this can sound, really, pleasing or cool or liberating or whatever. But then there's that aspect of where you are. Like if you're, if you're in somewhere like New York, for example, how do you work with like any of this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so there's that aspect, and there's the aspect of living in a capitalistic society, and like making a living, and these things. And I think so much of this points towards there are key concepts like impermanence and awareness, and I think it's something like I'm really big on, outside of an interest in stuff like spirituality and mysticism and stuff like that, is psychology, and something like awareness, and even enlightenment. I heard one spiritual teacher define enlightenment from a psychological point of view, where enlightenment was making it sounds like something Carl Jung would say, making the subconscious conscious, to ultimately make a balanced human being. You know what I mean? So, like even stuff like spiritual teachings and concepts and stuff like this, those can be just as much, coming from an unconscious place that you're just as neurotic. I've met people.
They can totally be just as much barriers to somebody's actual awakening as they can be aids to it.
Yeah, like I remember, for example, it's just like, stories of like this is my own, like I was younger and I met this guy, I worked at this blue collar job, in a warehouse, and there was this like young guy that he just came from Tibet, and he had scars on his body and this and that, and he came from that whole culture, of like he was, like Buddhist and everything. And I remember like I really looked up to this guy, right? And there was like an attractive girl that walked by, and all the other, like, the Westerners, they were catcalling, harassing the girl, and the girl was like really humiliated, right? And this guy that I had projected a certain idea of, this is like what a Buddhist is, because he comes from like, he's like from Nepal or whatever, and it's just like he joined in the catcalling. So it's just
so would Chogun Trungpa though.
well,
Maybe.
in the wrong way, but another example, like when I was in Indiana, like 2 years ago or something, I just happened to come across this e-state that was like started by the Dalai Lama's brother, and it was just like, it was amazing. It's just like, it was to help, the progress of Buddhism in the West, like in America, and they just had everything. They had stupas, they had, like shrines and everything, and I got a personal tour because it's small town Indiana, like by, the director of the thing. And the thing that took me back was how aggressive the entire time she was to convert me to being a Buddhist, and that Buddhism was the solution, the answer above everything else. You know what I mean? And
yeah, that's weird.
It was such just, and this is a person that's, like supposedly high up there in, the Buddhist channels or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
It's just
well,
like,
even like Chogun Trungpa was an alcoholic towards the end of his life, and I've heard stories, like I read this in this Sam Harris book, that there was, I don't totally recall the situation, but he had a couple students that one of them was this woman, and he demanded of the woman that she had to strip naked in public, and that this was a way for her to release ego attachment. And she refused. She like flipped out, and Chogun Trungpa demanded of his other students to like rip her clothes off. So she was like stripped naked by these people in this really traumatic way. Sure. And it was this whole like dramatic ordeal, And I guess later the student was like, wow, that was a really profound spiritual teaching. But at the time, I think it was like quite traumatic and a little bit weird. Like it doesn't have that compassionate, gentle quality that one would, at least for me, my preconception of a spiritual teacher is one of gentleness in a way. So yeah, it's really strange, and there's all kinds of stories of people that are regarded as high spiritual teachers that have sort of different neuroses that manifest in all different ways.
Yeah, like I've heard plenty of those, and I've heard plenty, about Chogyam Trungpa, and for myself, I think that's what it just really comes down to. Like there is, the tradition of, the having the what do they call it, like in Buddhism with the, the community, the Sangha.
Sangha, yeah.
Yeah, but it's just, it's like, I don't know, like from my, just listening to my own heart and what it tells me, it's just like, maybe there would be a time for that, but just to really kind of, be skeptical ultimately, saying like, I wouldn't want to be in that. If I was in that situation about having my clothes torn off of me and whatever, and it's supposed to be this spiritual based thing or whatever, I wouldn't care if it was Chogyam Trungpa, who I really admire. I would fight, to the end, like to not, to protect myself. You know what I mean? Ego based.
Yeah. It kind of makes a good story though.
Yeah, I mean, the victim, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, man. I totally agree with that. Like when I read this stuff or if I listen to a teacher, we're always kind of isolated within our own sphere of perception and reference. Like you were saying, like who knows what compassion really means? Like we're the only ones that can define for ourselves what compassion is and what compassionate action looks like. And it's that whole thing that I think even the Buddha was saying, where like we the only answers can be found within ourselves, and we have to really trust ourselves. Like we're fundamentally our own teacher. You know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the difference between sincerity and pretentious. It's like, you know, you know.
People are sincerely pretentious, though.
Well,
You know.
that's true. Like with compassion, for example, somebody that makes effort to be compassionate, like, maybe starts some, big thing that like, helps a lot of people. But like the whole thing is like where it's really a thing to feel good about themselves or to benefit themselves in that way. And I think, in my opinion, by kind of a certain, like whether it's a law of nature or something, it's just it just kind of it has a certain limitation where it's never enough, and it was never enough to begin with, or was never sincere, as opposed to someone that no one has to give them validation, they don't expect a reward, no one has to be in the same room, and they'll just do something because it's coming from a place of their heart. That's more sincere. Like that's what I was describing with empathy, where you're experiencing someone else as you experience yourself, and it's just that's totally those two things. I think that's internal and external, and it's really relating to the same thing but from two different places altogether.
Yeah. I do think though, like there's also this other way of looking at things where it's almost like insincerity doesn't really exist. Like everyone is completely, if they are insincere, they're completely sincere with their insincerity. Like people are fundamentally themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also there's almost, when I look into spiritual teachings, there's again a paradox because there's emphasis on harnessing certain qualities, but then there's also an aspect I think that sees everything as perfect the way it is, including with ourselves, like all of our neuroses, like people keep talking about with enlightenment, like realizing enlightenment in the here and now, like realizing that we're already enlightened and that it's our searching to attain some different state than the one we're in that leads us away from just realizing that we're enlightened as it is, that everything is just fundamentally what it is, and that's kind of the only truth that you can perceive. Yeah.
Yeah, like where I'm at with so much of this, like there was a time when I was really like first into I was really into philosophy. I was really into Western philosophy, and then that ultimately led to like Eastern philosophy and mysticism, and like including Buddhism, and so much of this is just like I think it really all kind of I mean not always with philosophy, but just pointing towards this central thing of again. Being able, like a common sense way of living. And I think, I bring psychology into that as well, because that's like, coining phrases like neurosis, because that's like a disease we all struggle with, right? Where it's just, you're consciously awake, but you're totally unconscious, especially in social situations. You shut off, and you're just not present, right? That's like the definition of neurosis. It's like in spirituality, you're not present. And it's just, but that's the thing, like taking any of this and dropping all the, like the concepts or whatever, and just being able to walk down the street and engage and be, not necessarily happy or anything, but just to be actually experience what's in front of you and participate with it. And I mean, for myself, that's what I use any of this towards. And then there's like, beyond that, there's just, besides how to live, the bigger aspects of life of like, I guess, for example, not that I'm there, but how to die. You know what I mean? Like we're all born, we're all going to die. And how do you, relate to that? And that,
You can't mess it up, Akira.
well, you can't mess it up, but like something like
You'll
Buddhism.
do fine. Don't worry about it.
Well, yeah, right. But Buddhism, something like especially in the Yang tradition, it's just like it benefits me in that way, and that's why I continue to go to it and reflect on it. Where like in the Tibetan tradition, where they talk about, like in the Tibetan book of Living and Dying, Sogyal Rinpoche talking about like the few first sentences talking about how death is the mirror to life, and they're one and the same, and that relates to the engagement in the moment. Like, it's, and it relates to impermanence and everything. And it's just, that relates to how to actually live. That,
Totally. I think the thing with death is that, we always look to this like great attractor at the end of our lives as being like the death. And I guess on a conceptual level, there is that. But it's also, we've all died already a million times. Like, in every moment we are constantly shifting, and that particular confluence of phenomena that comprises ourselves is not the same as the one it was 5 seconds, 5 minutes, or especially 5 years ago. So in that way, whatever self we are, this constantly shifting thing, it's died many, many times. We're always constantly dying and being reborn moment to moment.
Yeah. I mean, that's like one aspect of it. But then again, applying it to, like our everyday living, it's just like what I think about and how I apply it and how it's helped me is, okay, there's the big death that you cease to breathe. But then, for example, going through a breakup, or like
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's a form of death. Like anything that you lose, like I lost my job, like losing my apartment, losing an ex-girlfriend. Like here in Mexico, I was recently heartbroken over like I fell in love with a dog, and like it was this apartment I'm living in, and it was like a 6-month-old puppy, and it's just like it followed me everywhere I go, and I became attached. And to me, it might as well have been a human being. I'm walking down the street, and it gets like right in front of me. It gets totally slammed by a car and run over, and it's dead.
Oh man.
Yeah. And so the existential vacuum, the void, the anxiety of death. And I'm like, fuck, I'm in paradise. Excuse my language. And this has to happen. And then, but, this is something, again, like I've gone through my own process, and I try to reflect aspects of that through art, because it's just like I wasn't educated in this. Like, society, I feel like the society I grew up in, it's just it, and I would take a leap. It's just, and you've heard it before, like, the society, like contemporary America, is fearful of change and loss and death. And so, for example, when a person loses a loved one, I mean, not at a funeral, but like a breakup, like how does a person deal with it? They just kind of like replace what they lost. They don't go through a mourning process, And so, like, with this dog, for example, and I've done this with, like, my ex-lover, it's just, like, and I'm fumbling because I don't know what I'm doing, but I just followed my heart and, took the dog off the street and got a shovel, buried it on the side of the road, like, kissed the ground, like, after it was buried, and did a prayer. And I haven't read this anywhere, but, just, like, and of course it sucks for the next few days, but that's the way it goes, like, to give it like that space of like opening your heart to those uncomfortable feelings as for long as it has to last and go through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally, man. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
No, but there's no reason to feel sorry. It's just like when I went through the process with my ex, or, like leaving my job, like all that stuff happened at the same time. And most of the responses was a certain type of pity, or people felt
Sure, yeah.
But actually that's where, like stuff like that led me into spirituality in the first place. Because it felt weird that, especially, in my situation, to lose so much, all within, like 6 months, just I lost so much. And it felt so surreal just to like going to IKEA and just replacing like a job, a lover, an apartment, like friends. And so I'm like, maybe there's something more to this. So why not, like Joseph Campbell saying, like when falling, dive. So I dove into it, and
Mm-hmm.
terrifying, but you know what I mean? It's like, that's a natural process too. It's like you go through, like pain or whatever, and if you actually go through it, to my, lo and behold, my experience and surprise and shock was that it's actually the path to actual healing,
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. See, that's a natural process for you. Like I think that that's probably just about the healthiest perspective that you could have. Not to condemn just other people for however way they may naturally react to it, but like in the case of a breakup, people react to it in all different ways. Some people might go binge drinking and then hook up with a stranger or like whatever on the day it happens,
Yeah.
and doing something that promotes unconsciousness, like that increases their ability to ignore the situation and feelings that they have. And I've always gravitated towards the opposite, which is to feel that as deeply as possible in like the most sober way, and to kind of like really dive into those feelings, because I think that's where the gems of that's where like the good stuff is, and especially for converting that into creativity through music or through art or whatever.
Yeah, like I mean, I'm the opposite of you. Like I gravitate towards more like, the stuff it's uncomfortable and it's just, but I empathize, and that's what I've been there and I've done that. And that was kind of like, for me, that was a real turning point, like
I'm saying I also gravitate towards the more uncomfortable, like going into the stuff rather than
oh no, no, no,
pushing stuff away.
no, exactly. I was saying like I've done that in the past few years, but all the way up until then, I was just in a way of total coping and avoidance,
Uh huh.
Um,
Yeah.
and that was a huge turning point for me because, like I went through, for example, like one of my huge things was basically divorce. I was in a relationship for 10 years. And
Wow.
when that ended, I thought I'm going to lose my mind and I couldn't deal with the thing. So how did I deal with it? I dealt with it by not dealing with it. But of course, I didn't have that consciousness in the moment. And from an outsider's point of view, like if you looked at my life, like people, like would, reflect back to me like Akira, like, oh my God, you have such an amazing life. You're doing like, Kung Fu with real Shaolin monks. You're, like I was doing this Bikram yoga thing for the first time. I was like doing all this hiking. I was, just doing so much stuff. But the honest bottom line truth of the whole thing, when I look back, it's like it was all in avoidance to actually deal with the situation of
Uh huh.
dealing with it, like, which was the separation, like to deal with the emotions of that, to deal with the physical withdrawals of that. Like I did binge drinking, the one night stand thing. It's just
Yeah.
like, and now I have the reference point where most recently, like a few years back when I went through a breakup, which was one of 5 years. It's like it was strangely that was more devastating than the 10 year, but like I dove into that and I have the reference point of the two. So when I look back now, and again, going back to the art thing, like I created a body of work that took 3 years called Love in Spite of Everything, which was
Mm.
like, like kind of a recording of that process I went through, the mourning and all that. Like, for example, when I went through that separation, one of the very first things I did was to do a painting in homage to the thing. And it's one of the hardest pieces of artwork that I've ever made. I painted like, I found a photo of she and I painted it. And it was one thing to, paint. It took me like, basically a day and a full day. And by the next day, I felt it wasn't enough. So I wanted to write every positive memory over those 5 years I could recall. And so I
Mm.
remember I couldn't even complete the first sentence without just totally crying, and I had to
Yeah.
walk to the room, and then I was able to get to two sentences, and then again, like my hand would shake, and I just couldn't do it. And it was a thing of a process, and I don't know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I know what I've done in the past, and that just like it feels like that didn't work. But um, I could say with like experience now, even if I didn't do it quote unquote the right way or whatever, like I felt healed, and I know the difference now. You know what I mean?
Mm.
But that's really yeah, incredibly difficult, and I don't
Yeah.
place that standard on anyone because yeah, like it was rough to actually
I
deal with it.
I mean, I think that's just so cool though, and it definitely to me shows a sign of some kind of maturity that in the wake of that breakup, you chose to focus on your positive memories. You know, I think a lot of people like they break up with their partner, and even if they spent 5 years together with an infinite number of really beautiful experiences that they shared, they just get to this place of being like, fuck that person. Like, I'm going to demonize that person in my mind now. I'm not going to think anything positive about them. They're now my enemy. You
Yeah,
know, and a lot of people do that. But like for you to acknowledge that actually you guys shared a lot of beauty and that you have all these memories that are really positive, and you're not going to let the separation and whatever drama surrounds that to hinder your capacity to love that person, to honor those memories that you shared. Like, I think that's tremendous.
yeah, and it was all. I mean, but don't get me wrong. I definitely went through my like process as well because there was. I mean,
Yeah,
this
sure.
like I don't. I'll talk about my life very openly, but like I won't. Especially like if it's ever putting someone else in a bad light, so I won't like cross that line. But yeah, there was stuff that happened that wasn't so cool, and it definitely put me in a place of, like calling the person like like a bitch and everything. Just going through that whole
Yeah.
process of, and that's, but to me, that was part of the process as well, and like that's healthy. And it's just like to not be in denial, like just like a meditation, not to judge the thing, right?
Yeah,
And
just to honor it as it happens.
yeah, but then the responsibility as an artist, like I didn't want to um, put the quote unquote the negative aspects of that into the world. You know what I mean? Because
Mm.
again, unless I could see how somehow that's going to benefit anyone, other than like it just something like that, of expressing, my shortfalls or my, resentment or whatever. I don't see how anything can come of that other than my own kind of, self, uh, I don't know the word, but, self, I guess, masturbation comes to mind, you know what I mean?
Mm.
It just feels so wrong. And,
I know what you mean. The kind of like self pity thing.
yeah, because I've seen that like this, like, something like social media, like there was a really good friend that went through a separation, and it was just, it was really, sad how the person used social media just to plaster the person. Because
I hate that.
yeah, and it's just like that is just, you know what I mean, to take uh, like responsibility for your actions, and like
Yeah.
with as an artist, the last thing I'll say about like this whole thing, the process of that, what I went through, it was a motivational thing because it was really, I definitely felt ungrounded, going through a process of mourning, especially when it's so fresh and really confronting the thing. But the art, it just really felt like, especially how this can benefit anyone, it just really served a purpose to the mourning once again. And
Mm-hmm.
it gave me a, kind of the will to courage, to actually um, go into that, those difficult places. And
Mm.
yeah. So,
So, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to like ask you. So, was there a particular thing that you can recall that was a catalyst for your kind of shift in relationship to your life? Like, did you have something you might call like a spiritual awakening or something like that? Like, when did that shift occur for you personally?
um, it occurred to me through these, I mean, like just like in recent years, it really occurred to me, or it happened in these situations of life. And for myself, the art that I've been making for more than a decade now, I've been drawing like my entire life before I could write the alphabet. But, like when I started bringing consciousness into it, I really began from a place of self, like literally looking in the mirror, drawing myself and confronting, who I was, like on the surface level of, my imperfections physically, like what I didn't like about myself, and then going inward from there, and developing insight. And from there, it just really evolves. Then it goes outward, it goes into culture, and I did a cultural body of work to acknowledge the imperfections and the perfections of that. And from there, that evolved into spirituality, which I call nature, the nature of things. And so beautifully, again, the integration of art and life, the two really kind of became symbiotic, and they just really unified in that evolution. Once again, like when I was going through the first stage of self, that's at the end of self, when I was doing that body of work, that's when the 10-year relationship ended, but I didn't have the courage to actually go into the thing. But then when I was in, the series of culture that came after it, I was in that other relationship. And I was asking myself, when is the cultural exploration going to end? Because it must have went on for like 6 years or something. I was making all this artwork about culture, painting dollar bills and these pop icon things and, reflections on all that. And then that relationship ended, and I went deep into that. And so beautifully, from going deep into that, that's when I became aware of even the concept of impermanence, that nothing lasts forever, and that this is a process of things. And then I painted that experience, that awareness. So life always came first, and it still does. That's what I'm doing. I continue to do with from nature. Came the Love in Spite of Everything body of work, which just was kind of a subchapter of the nature of things. And then from there, it evolved into subconscious exploration of life drawings of what I'm doing right now. So, and who knows where it'll go to next, but it's just been a constant evolution of looking deeper and deeper into, this life I've been given, and then just reflecting what I've learned or realized or whatever from it, one painting at a time.
Cool, man. Well, thanks so much for taking some time to talk. This was awesome.
No, thank you. It's like I feel honored. So yeah.
Cool. So where can people find your work, and where can they find you?
It's really easy. Like you could just basically, I use, the social media sections of Instagram, Facebook, a little bit of Twitter, but basically just my name, Akira, my last name, Beard, like the facial hair. You can just Google it, and you can find all of that, including my website. So just a quick Google search on my name, and everything comes up.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, man. So that was Akira Beard with the Inner Eye podcast. Thanks again so much for listening. I'm sorry for the echoey quality of his voice. We recorded this through Skype, so hopefully in the future I'll figure out a way to make that not happen. I hope wherever you are in space-time, you are having a beautiful whatever time it is there, and I will see you again shortly.